Uh, um, so, Kathy, I may need your help to project the PowerPoint because I have prepared a PowerPoint view. So, on 1st of October 2025, the Association of Relatives issued a formal appeal expressing profound dissatisfaction to remain unaccounted for within a short period from October 2008 to May 2009, a figure verified by the former Bishop of Mannar, Reverend Father Joseph Raya. Further skeletons are emerging from Germany and other parts of the occupied territories. These remains demand justice for the genocide as the victims no longer rely solely on the international communities to speak on their behalf. In direct action for justice, the relatives of the forcibly disappeared in the north and east have initiated a hunger strike beginning on 27th of September at Germany in the north and at Tambiluville Central Market in Empara in the east. The circuit-style hunger strike calls for independent international investigations into enforced disappearances, Tamil genocide, war crimes, and mass graves. On the second day of the strike, that is to say, on the 28th of September, affected families, local communities, and members of the Association of Relatives of Enforced Disappearances, ARED, joined in large numbers. Key participants included Amalraj Amaranaiki, Jaffna District Leader, Thambirasa Sevrani, Ampara District Leader, and Human Rights Advisor Thamodaram Pradeepan, who have been delayed visas to come to this council. This courageous action highlights the ongoing determination of Tamil families to demand truth, justice, and accountability. What is in the report that disturbs them? Because they are doing a protest against this report. The report states so what is particularly troubling is the failure to specifically recognize Tamil victims by framing the Germany as a family searching for a. The report individualizes the systematic atrocity affecting 146,679 people, obscuring the scale and genocidal intent behind these disappearances. Immediately after, the report highlights a woman from the south, a singular case, emphasized because of its long duration, while minimizing the collective suffering of Tamil victims in the northern east. This approach dilutes the gravity of enforced appearances and the targeted genocide, weakening the High Commissioner's mandate and undermining the credibility of these recommendations. As a women's rights activist who has worked closely with those mothers on the ground, I can attest to their profound disappointment. In June 2025, during the 59th session, the High Commissioner personally travelled to Germany to these mothers. They expected their suffering and recommendations to be reflected in the 60th session report. Yet, the report publicly referred only to mothers from the south, privileging certain groups while ignoring Tamil victims in the north and east, a repetition of diplomatic strategies used by the Sri Lankan government. During the 59th session under Agenda number 2, I explicitly cautioned the High Commissioner not to fall into this trap, warning that the government would manipulate attention to marginalize the most affected victims. Unfortunately, these warnings were ignored. I then stated, we urge the High Commissioner ahead of the upcoming visit to Sri Lanka not to listen to the voices of the government. It coincides also with the 29th session of the Committee on Enforced Disappearance, during which Sri Lanka is under review. Yet, families of Tamil victims were prevented from participating to this CED also. During that session, nearly 200 representatives from the Sri Lankan government defended the state virtually and in person. The Office of Missing Person was represented in Geneva. The Office of Reparation was represented virtually the Swiss authorities in silencing victims and those defending them. During this ongoing, Switzerland organized a bilateral meeting with humanitarians to discuss solutions while the UN review of Sri Lanka continues. This raises serious concerns for me that Switzerland may be facilitating backtracking on fundamental rights for Tamils, effectively encouraging their acceptance of life within a unitary state rather than ensuring genuine accountability, truth and justice. We have received information suggesting that for Palestinians, when Americans' visas are refused, the UN is making arrangements within its system to allow participation, including planning some meeting in Geneva. If such measures are possible for Palestinians, should the Human Rights Council itself consider relocating to another country, one that would allow Tamils human rights defenders to participate more freely and fairly? Currently, authorities are selective in granting visas, providing access to single mothers and even perpetrators of genocide, while denying entry to direct victims and their representatives. This Swiss authorities without valid charges, precisely at a critical moment in our fight for justice. Is it acceptable that facilitating participation could be treated as a crime? This raises profound concerns about the role of Swiss authorities in obstructing justice and defense. Our call to the United Nations is we urgently call upon the United Nations and its mechanism to conduct independent, impartial, and comprehensive investigation war crimes and other grave violations against Tamils. We call them to ensure accountabilities for all perpetrators, including state and parliamentary actors, through international justice mechanisms such as the ICC and ICJ. Strengthen the mandate of the OMP to protect victims' families and systematically collect evidence through SNAP. Provide reparations and guarantees of non-repetition with external interference. To address the gaps and shortcomings in High Commissioner's recommendations, ensuring prompt and effective implementation, ensure states, including Switzerland, facilitate victims' representatives to participate fully in UN forum side events and advocacy platform. 35 years after the cessation of hostilities, Tamil families continue to suffer from enforced appearances, displacement, and impunity. The international community cannot allow violations or the silencing of victims and defenders to persist. Immediate action is imperative to uphold the principles of truth, justice, and accountability. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nishanti. And now, without further delay, let me invite our second speaker, Mr. Sridharan, to take the floor.
Thank you. Dear colleagues and friends and excellencies, I thank AETF and Global Tamil Movement for inviting me as speaker for this side event on truth, justice and reparation for genocide in Sri Lanka. This council is part of the international mechanism which failed to protect Tamils from Sri Lanka's state, historical and recent genocide. The 26 years genocidal war against violence by Sri Lankan government, which ended in May 2009, claimed an estimated 175,000 lives, with an estimated 100,000 Tamil civilians killed during the final stages of the war, and over 146,000 Tamils are uncounted. The Sri Lankan government preferred extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearance, and incriminate selling to civilian areas. In the case for Sri Lanka, where the state's genocidal offensive against the Tamil people was met not with resistance but with endorsement from powerful across the world. At the time, Colombo heist its genocide as part of the war on terror, and narrative eagerly adapted to states worldwide across the political spectrum, from the United States of America and China to India and Pakistan with the liberation tigers of Tamil. Conscripted in countries across the globe, Sri Lanka was important towards diversing in UN reports that the world did not act to stop the killing in Beni is a moral failure that Tom Fletcher, UN Emergency Relief Coordinator, has now invoked repeatedly when speaking about Gaza. But the world failed not end in 2009. In the years since, no one has been held accountable for the atrocities. Not a single soldier, commander, or political leader has been brought justice. Instead, success in the Sri Lankan governments have been revoked with years of diplomatic engagement and military partnerships. The impunity that Sri Lankan enjoys has set disturbing precedent. The result, global meant to never again allow such errors to occur, then it must take steps to demonstrate that the mass accused will not unpunished. The protest which begins in September and continues across the northeast together relatives of the disappearing from 5 districts alongst activists and members and they reiterated their rejection of the domestic mechanism and instead on an independent international investigation. For 3,146 consecutive days, relatives of the disappeared have protested in the streets across Northeast, demanding to know the fate of their loved ones. To Human Rights Council members, imposed and the LTT by some countries as a tool to suppress the democratic voices and activities of the Sri Lanka. Seven repeat of the Renovation of the Terrorism Act to number 49 of 1979 PTA immediately. So number 8, they are who are the victims of genocide in Sri Lanka. We therefore request you to investigate this mission and mention the appropriate word of Tamils wherever it's needful. Thank you.
I speak not only as a representative of Tamil rights group, but also and mainly as a priest who has experienced the horror around Chemani mass graves and a witness to the first excavation in 1999. I want to share with you my personal experience of the horror surrounding the Chemani mass graves in Jaffna. In the middle of June 1996, curfew was declared from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. the following day. A sense of horror speech, I refer to this period as Black Hole. People were so terrified that they would not dare speak about it, let alone protest against it. A colleague of mine approached me and said, "Father, the church should not keep quiet. We should give voice to the voiceless people." So I wrote a two-page letter dated October the 10th, 1996, to the Vatican delegate in Colombia. Those who love justice and peace and uphold human dignity. Arbitrary arrests are made regardless of age, sex, or walk of life, students on their way to school, government employees while on duty, housewives at home, are bundled into a vehicle, the notorious white van without a number plate, which goes past military sentry posts during curfew hours unchallenged. Another frightening aspect is the denial of arrests made even in broad daylight by uniformed security personnel. No warrant of arrest is produced, no certificate thereof is issued. As relatives go in search of information from one sentry post to another, they may answer, there is no one here listed by that name. Leaving the victims and their relatives utterly helpless. Any protest of the detainee would be stifled by the walls of his cell, that is, if he is allowed to. Of law in Colombo filtered gradually to Jaffna. Lance Corporal Somarindra Rajapaksa, who was found guilty, confessed that about 300 to 400 were buried in Chemani. Yeah, I was watching him at close quarters. A while later, he moved to one of the forensic experts who followed him squatted down and examined the soil and said, "This soil has and asked the next of kin of the disappeared to come ready to sign affidavits. In response, 200 people turned up. I had to write another letter, this time to President Chandrika. Please expedite the excavations. Chemani is a waterlogged area and the monsoon is fast approaching. The skeletal remains could be damaged. Besides, people living in the neighborhood of Chemani are complaining about noise of machines at night. By the LTTE. But friends, this was simply impossible. I have personally witnessed how tightly Chemani was secured with barbed wire fences, watchtowers, dikes, and a soldier stationed every few meters around the area. Now the powers that be are talking about instituting a domestic mechanism of investigation. Many commissions of investigation were appointed. None of them yielded any community. Let it be remembered that to trivialize trauma is to re-triggerize or re-traumatize. Internal domestic mechanisms, as the famous international criminal lawyer Francis Boyle has said, in Sri Lanka, such a mechanism would be like asking Nazi officers to investigate Nazi criminals. Nothing short of an international independent investigation mechanism can deliver justice.
Indeed was taken by force during British colonialism and carried forward by the post-colonial Sri Lankan state. Ulam Tamil people have been affected by 30 years war. It was ended one hundred 54,000 to 253,000 Tamil civilians was killed by Sri Lankan government. More than 70,000 was injured. More than 100,000 was disappeared and enforceably disappeared. Sexual violence was occurred against Tamil women and the children was killed. Psychology damages occurred to the Ulam Tamil people and the Ulam Tamil people properties was burned and the Jaffna library was burned in 1981. And international human rights and humanitarian laws, that time the war was ended. During the war period and the impact of the war, Ulam Tamil people, we have lost our loved ones. We lost our children also. Impossibly disappeared our loved ones. Political prisoners are in the prisons without any investigation. Still they are in the prison. Prevention of Terrorism Act and other acts are in existence still after end of the process. The people of Ulam are protected national group. They must be protected under Convention of Genocide and other international human rights and humanitarian laws for the prevention of genocide. Government of Sri Lanka not to have any genuine political will in the truth, justice and reparation process. This process has failed in many times and still remains. After the end of the war, NRC, Presidential Commission and other commissions were established and inquired the victim and reported to the government, but people are not satisfied. They didn't get any reparation from that commissions. We have to discuss why truth, justice and reparation process are not effective in Sri Lanka. As I said in the above, the fundamental rights that were historically denied and contributed to the outbreak of armed conflict in Sri Lanka continue to be systematically suppressed by the mechanism of the state. As a result, genuine reparation or reconciliation remains elusive. Even 16 years after the cessation of hostilities, unless and until the government of Sri Lanka formally acknowledges and guarantees the political, civil and collective rights of the Elam Tamil people, a sustainable and just resolution to the ethnic conflict cannot be achieved. Result, there has been no credible or image in a manner that ensures the safety and dignity of the witnesses. Single colonization in Tamil lands are still continuing. Tamil lands are still remains as military camps in northern east of Sri Lanka. Tamil language is continuously marginalized by the government of Sri Lanka in everywhere. Tamil's cultural rights are depriving intentionally. Example, Tahiti and Kinia, Kurundur, Vedukanaris, there are Tamil lands are occupying by the Sri Lankan government and they are building the Buddhist temples without any concern and intentionally they are doing. Monuments of the Tamils are destroying. Remembrance of the Tamil death people are denied by the government. And the still CIDs and TIDs presenting in the victims' houses and they are inquiring the victims. And one more point, some journalists cannot work independently. Example, recently one young journalist named Kumanan Kanamudi Pilla, he is very active in mass grave. He was inquired by the CID and he couldn't work his work independently. Therefore, in this contest, my view and conclusion is all the injustice previously suffered by and redress, the Sri Lankan state has failed to take meaningful steps toward truth-seeking, justice, reparation or reconciliation or guarantees of non-occurrence for war-affected communities. The legitimate expectation of victims and affected population remain a stand-alone reparation process without accountability for crimes committed against a particular group cannot be accepted as a legitimate or adequate mechanism. The affected constituency of Elam Tamils, whose core grievance is genocide, should not have that grievance equated with other crimes, even if those crimes, when considered in aggregated, constitute international crimes such as crime against humanity or war crimes. The genocidal character of the ICJ, a dedicated international criminal forum for Sri Lanka to find the proceeding must prioritize investigation of genocidal intent and the consistent criminal. capable of preventing and stopping organized genocide must be pursued concurrently with the aforementioned international investigation. Failure to pursue both remedies in parallel risks creating been used as an instrument to effect regime Sri Lanka manage Sinhalese political for geopolitical aims. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Vaishnavi. We sincerely appreciate your clear and thoughtful intervention. And now I give the floor to our last but not least speaker, Mrs. Shivani, attorney at law from UK.
Hello, thank you. I just want to explain that I represent Sri Lankan Tamils and Sri Lankan Muslims and Sinhalese civilians from Sri Lanka. So I don't believe that I'm particularly partisan when it comes to looking at the human rights situation in Sri Lanka, and I have represented I want to look at the visit of the High Commissioner to Sri Lanka. It was really meaningful, it was really genuine. And there are some matters that clearly are not in dispute as far as the UN High Commissioner is concerned. So I don't think that as activists or as human rights lawyers, we actually need to kind of demonstrate that these things have happened. So the High Commissioner had said he noted the same old patterns of surveillance of human rights defenders and that these persists. And significantly, that his office has been mandated to gather and preserve information and analyse violations and abuses and has established a dedicated project for this purpose. So I would be very interested in looking at how far that has gone and who's in that, and also actually the relationship of that office with I'm told not to go to Sri Lanka, but I mean, that's my commitment. And as a diaspora Tamil, I want to go back and I want to try and affect change in my environment. Again, not just for Tamils, but I mean, I represented a lot of Muslims after the Easter bombing because nobody would represent them. Everyone was terrified of representing Muslims. And I represent a lot of progressive Sinhalese activists. So the situation is this: Sri Lanka is two different countries. The beaches are under the control of the army, various leisure centres are. There are lots of cafes that are under the control of the army in the north and the northeast. They're shocked that every auto or lorry or taxi that goes from the north to the south, if it has a Tamil in it, even if it doesn't have a Tamil in it, is going to be stopped by the police for a bit of money. I mean, that doesn't happen in the south. It's just that they are two different countries. And you know that you're heading towards former conflict territory because there are suddenly no lights, right? You're in a car, it's all dark. And, you know, you have a temple, you have an army camp. You have an army nursery, for example. You have an army school where the teachers who teach in the army school get about 5 times more than the teachers who teach in Vanley because no one wants to be there because it's really poor. So why do you have the Prevention of Terrorism Act? Now, it's really important to understand that the Sri Lankan government has used the PTA not just for suspected LTT members, but after the Easter bombing, wearing the burqa was a terrorist act. There were prescriptions on carrying flags, on lots of other matters that affected protest. For example, anything that affected the integrity, the sovereignty of the state. So anything that is said and done PTA is used in Sri Lanka to cover a wide array of offences. In fact, again, I know I should be saying this, but I went to the Madhu pilgrimage, okay? I'm British. I went there, Sri Lanka, Sinhalese family. Because, and there's no point looking for like cases of arrest of, disappearance, murder, and so on. People just don't do anything. They don't go out. They don't challenge anything. They're very, very careful when they protest. Of Sri Lanka's armed forces are in one district, which is Mullaitivu, which was former LTT heartland, which is basically the people who are the most devastated because their infrastructure was completely devastated. What the Sri Lankan government has done, it is a different government, it's not Rajapaksa, it's not a chauvinistic government. I genuinely believe that the Sri Lankan government are concerned about corruption. We as Tamils, as a Tamil diaspora, have to wake up and realise that take note of the government's commitment to repeal the Prevention of Terrorism Act, mainly used against individuals from Tamil and Muslim communities. Okay, so to establish an independent public prosecutorial body. I'll come on to talk about that. And calls for an end to all forms of harassment and reprisals against representatives. Okay, so today I talk where does the information come from? All right, how are these complaints being investigated? So we have the skeletons. What has to go on from there? How does that work? Okay, so let's look at other countries where there were examinations of mass graves. Bosnia, Argentina, Syria, Colombia, and I'm sure people know of many, many more. Now, these are countries where there have been rigorous, laboratory analysis, anthropology, pathology, DNA testing, other tests like ballistics, chemistry, or insects, soil examination, and then combine all the results to explain who DNA examples or DNA artifacts are not present. But the more fundamental point is this. Who is doing the examination? So there are 10 CID officers who are examining complaints. So it's a government. Yeah, okay. So that's where they get. We don't know if these people have provided their consent to the CID to take their names, and consent is fundamental in international law, to take their names and to go off and investigate whether there is a nexus between them and the graves. Okay. So think about it. Most of the people the United Nations needs to understand how many people are legitimately going to come forward and incriminate themselves, are going to come forward and potentially be disappeared. Now, we can have all the science of the world, and we have to have an international monitoring mechanism because, structurally, we failed from the start. no matter what our intentions are. Sorry, that's what I wanted to say. I do, as usual, go over. Thank you.
Sorry to make you short at the. I would like to now open the floor to the audience. If you wish to share, comment, ask a question, or react to what has been said, please feel free to take the microphone. If there is no question, you can continue what you explained, because it was very interesting to hear you, but I was very, I wanted to give also the floor to the audience, that's why I...
Yeah, okay. So I think what I really wanted to round off to say is that I know that there are varying degrees of criticism of the UN, but I think that obviously the UNHRC are constrained by the nature of their engagement with governments. I completely understand that. And that's why I really welcome the statements that were made by the High Commissioner. But for us, it really is, this happened in 1960. Real support from international countries who have the expertise, and if the data collectors have to be those who are not the CID. I mean, and it's one of the fundamental problems of militarisation. If you have people under occupation, they're not going to go to the CID and say, actually, you know what, we think that you took our daughter away and then tortured her. Like, who's going to do that? And that's really the simple message I want to bring. We only have the archaeological, anthropological department at Jaffna University, and they're really good. I mean, they have a lot of expertise. They investigated exhumations, in fact, related to the JVP in the South. The PTA. It's just like, it's non-negotiable. And give us the expertise so that we can get the best that we can now because of the delay. That's all we want.